Greetings, my name is Louise Dente, and we welcome you to yet another edition of Cultural Caravan.
My name's Aton Edwards, and I'm the Executive Director of the International Preparedness Network, and we're a non-governmental organization based in New York City that teaches civilians and professionals to mitigate against and respond to all the different types of natural, technological, environmental, and civil disasters.
In this edition, we have a special as relates to survival. Survival, particularly in this day and age where we know that many disasters, both natural as well as unexplained and unexpected, have impacted millions of people across the globe. And we're joined by a person who has been on the front lines of informing our people and people all around the world on how they can protect themselves against natural disaster. We welcome Mr. Aton Edwards. Mr. Edwards is the author of a book entitled Preparedness Now. And it basically focuses on how strategies where you can not only prevent but also respond to emergencies and disasters. He is executive director of the New York-based nonprofit organization International Preparedness Network, or IPN, and his work with the Red Cross, Center for Disease Control, the New York City Police Department, and other organizations to train thousands both domestically and overseas in survival strategies. We want to welcome you to the Cultural Caravan.
Thank you for having me, Louise.
Yes. You know, the first thing I say is, what inspired you to go into this endeavor?
Oh, well, my father was in the Strategic Air Command, and I kind of grew up in an environment that these kinds of things were discussed. And of course, growing up in the tumultuous 60s didn't hurt it either. Motivated by a number of factors, not, again, my father, the times, also activism and militancy. I can remember when I was younger, my Uncle Johnny, who read a book that was written actually for the Nation of Islam, it was called The Fall of America. I was like, wow, this is a heavy title. The book had flames on the cover. I remember reading that. I remember something in the book said that every African-American man, woman, and child should carry with them a survival kit. And I talked to my father about it, and he said, yeah, that's what they give you in the Air Force. So at that point, and then I saw the Ten Commandments, which is, strangely enough, they had a scene where they had the Moses character, and he had a little kit in his side with his gear. And I said, that might be something that I would want to do for myself. And I was a young boy then. And so I started doing things that related to the discipline. I got into archery, I got into hiking and wilderness camping and survival, and one thing led to another. And I was motivated by circumstance, motivated by community, motivated by period, and as I grew older, motivated by the realities that I knew that we were going to confront over the course of the next decade.
Now, you talked about the times, of course, knowing as African Americans in our sojourn here, we've always been surviving, the survival strategy, just staying alive, raising a family. And most people, when they think about survival, they're just talking about putting food on the table, making sure that children get, properly cared for and clothed. We don't really think about those other unexpected events that have occurred, particularly as recently as the last couple of years, that can seriously impact the life of many people. I know that, as many people know, not only were we impacted here in New York with the 9/11 tragedy, and I'm sure everybody in the audience can remember where they were on that very fateful day, but also even more recently, within the last few years, we were all impacted by the Katrina disaster, where a number of our people were displaced. Millions of people were just displaced overnight, and many lost their lives. I know on this table you have assembled lots of different items here that people should use, but let's talk about what some of the things that you are doing as an organization to support groups that are trying or support people in trying to protect themselves.
Well, one of the things that we're doing is that we've actually constructed a national plan for self-reliance and preparedness, and it's called the new SERP for short, National Urban Self-Reliance and Preparedness Program. Because what we've realized after Katrina, and even before Katrina, there was a situation in North Carolina, Princeville, where there was a town that was completely flooded, and 3,000 people were instantly made homeless. They didn't get any support from the federal mechanisms, or not the support that they needed. So they were actually pushed out of their homes permanently and had to resettle. Then, of course, came the Katrina incident, and of course, before that, 9/11. And we realized that we didn't have a apparatus in place that could serve our particular needs within our community. And so I thought that it was necessary to develop a plan of action. A plan of action that that involved the creation of a physical, actual infrastructure. The infrastructure that does not exist now. It exists to some degree within the Red Cross, within the Salvation Army, the federal government, but it doesn't exist on a community level. So we said we've got to make it exist on a community level, and so we designed this program called the New SERP. And that's one of the things. This will allow people to stand on their own for the critical periods that follow catastrophes and emergencies. Like usually you hear the government talking about there's a 3-day period, 72 hours, but actually in our experience that period is a lot longer. It usually extends a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, because it just doesn't involve the fact that you don't have assistance from the federal government or the National Guard or the local police departments or everything. You're talking about a complete change of paradigm. You might not have home, you might not have shelter, food, you might not have any medicine, and sometimes it takes a while to get these things in order. So an infrastructure, a community infrastructure, allows people to kind of access the things that they need without the intervention of the local or state authorities, so that they can actually ride out the disaster for long periods. And so that's what we're doing right now.
But let's talk about particularly locally. I know that many of us know that since the 9/11 attack, the thing that has attacked many people has been the natural disasters. We here in the New York area are not particularly things like earthquakes and things like that haven't impacting us as much as it has been in other people, such as tsunami and various other. But what are some of the things that people in this area need to be aware of on a natural disaster way, what things we can do, as well as people in other parts of the country need to do, and what are some of the things that we can use that can help support our lives in that?
Okay, first thing I'd say is that we got to look out for things that you wouldn't expect. It's not the things that you expect that are going to get you. It's the things that you don't expect are going to get you. For instance, an earthquake. When you think of earthquake, you're probably thinking of Los Angeles. You're probably thinking of San Francisco, or the areas of the country that are seismically active more than this. But what you don't realize is that there are active faults right here in New York City. New York had a major earthquake about 110 years ago or so, and we're due for a new one, because earthquakes come in cycles. Like you've heard of the geysers at Yellowstone that erupt every 40 minutes or so. Well, earthquakes, the earth has a cycle, and the earth does things in cycles. So you can expect to see an earthquake in New York, probably sometime soon. Now, depending on the size of the earthquake, which is called a magnitude, if we get a large earthquake, if we get anything over 6.5 or 6.6 or maybe something larger on the Richter scale, we have a problem. And because we have an old city, we have an old infrastructure that serves the city. And what I mean by infrastructure, folks, is that the pipes that bring you the water, the pipes that bring you the gas, electrical lines and things like that, it's very old. In an earthquake, a lot of it's going to be sheared, cut. We're going to have an enormous problem with water delivery. We're going to have an enormous problem with gas fires and things like that, and also electrical power. And we're going to have a huge quantity of older buildings that are going to collapse simply because they're old. So in a major earthquake in New York, you could displace a quarter of the entire population, where you'd need to have housing for 2 million people. Right off of the bat. And each one of those 2 million people would need food to eat, water to drink, things like that. That's one thing. And of course, there are other things like the stuff that we normally get, like hurricanes. We had a huge hurricane in New York State in 1938, where I believe, I can't remember how many were killed, but it was an enormous amount of damage in Long Island where communities were completely submerged. If we had like a, let's say, a level 4 hurricane on the Safer-Simpson scale, with winds exceeding like 130 miles an hour, 145 miles an hour, what we would see, tremendous damage across the city. We'd see the storm surge would submerge certain areas of Manhattan, would be under 3, 4, 5 feet of water. We would have in places like this where we're at now, in Queens, they'd be submerged. So what we're talking about is you've got to have a plan to deal with the natural disasters. And then, of course, you have to have a plan to deal with the unnatural disasters, which are the disasters provoked by us, as in 9/11. We still live within 22 miles of Indian Point. Now, Indian Point is in Buchanan, New York. That's the nuclear power plant. Strangely enough, New York Times just revealed that the Indian Point facility is built right near an active fault. If we had an earthquake in that area, that reactor could go critical. What you've all been hearing about the words meltdown, but the term meltdown has been drawn from what happens to a nuclear power reactor in the event that there's an accident where the reactor overheats. It's called a core meltdown, and that's where we get that terminology. And we could have a meltdown of the Indian Point facility. And if we did, everyone within a 50-mile radius of that nuclear power plant would have to be evacuated and moved out of the city. It's called the peak injury area. I mean, everybody in this that's watching this, most likely, that lives within that peak injury area would have to move out of the city. So then we have the events like 9/11. But there are other events that could happen. We can have another 9/11, or we could also have someone using a tactical nuclear device, which is something that you've been hearing about this on the campaign trail with Obama and McCain. But the fact of the matter is, the reality is, folks, is that there are people who are out there who are looking to get their hands on nuclear weapons. If they can't get their hands on nuclear weapons, then they'll get their hands on the material that you construct the nuclear weapons from. It's called highly enriched uranium. Now, when they get a hold of it, they can improvise a device, can be planted in Manhattan, and most improvised devices, folks, won't come in missiles. They'll come in the back of trucks. They'll come through New York Harbor. They'll come across the George Washington Bridge. And if we are unlucky, and the terrorists that would use them are lucky, they can put them right smack dab in the center of the city, detonate it, and we'd have a little version of Hiroshima right in the middle of Manhattan, because that's the major target area, or in Washington, D.C. Now, it might sound awful. I see it's disturbing,
Yes,
but the reality is that even if we did, we'd have, of course, there would be a tremendous amount of death and destruction, but there would be more life that would survive. There'd be an enormous amount of people that would survive something like that, and they've got to know what to do, because they know that right off of the bat when we have an event like this, and sadly, folks, got to tell you, we will have an event like this. It's almost a certainty. And the thing is that when we do have an event like this, that it's going to change the paradigm. It's going to push it even further away than it was before 9/11. We're going to see a breakdown of the transportation systems that bring food in. We're going to see a breakdown of the systems that we use for emergency medical services. We're not going to have the things available to us that we have now. And if we don't do it for ourselves, then you're going to be faced with the reality of not having these systems in place for long periods, and then you're going to have to survive by any means that you can find available to you. And that's what we want to avoid. We want to give you the tools and the information that's necessary for you to carry on with no matter what you confront.
Tell us how these items here could help, if support someone's life in the event of an actual emergency.
Okay, well, right to my left here, this is a personal kit. This is my personal kit. This is my actual personal kit. Now, these are basically things that I carry around with me at all time. I mean, I have my first aid stuff in here. I have personal hygiene items in here. I have everything that you can need, that I would need to survive like a certain amount of time. I have energy bars in this thing. I have lights. I have lighters. I have everything that I'd need to survive a critical period. Like when the disaster strikes, folks, what happens is you're caught in the middle of it no matter where you are. So whatever you might think you have in your house, it doesn't do you any good if you're on the A train on the way home, or if you're on a bus if you're in the Q100 like I was today, or the B100 like I was today, you actually have to have what you need with you at all times. So the first thing is you got to have a personal preparedness kit with all the things that you need. Personal hygiene items are very important, folks, because one of the first things that goes during a disaster is personal hygiene. And that might not sound like much, but let me tell you something. You can degrade pretty far after a certain amount. You know, one of the things we do, Louise, it might be funny, it's a little funny, a little levity to the subject. I tell people that I train, let's suppose you had to evacuate New York, right? And a lot of people are going to try to get out by car. Now, you have a problem driving anyway with a car in New York, but try to get out during an emergency, all right? So you're in your car for an hour, 2 hours caught in traffic, 3 hours, 4 hours. What's going to happen? Think about it.
Well, people are going to have to go to the bathroom.
That's what I'm talking about. So let's say now, not to gross your viewers out, but we used to say that, okay, so let's say you're caught on one of the bridges, the Brooklyn Bridge or whatever. So you have the Hudson River beneath you, or you have the East River, and then you have the Yellow River on the bridge, simply because you're going to be on a bridge with a couple thousand cars, and they've been there for hours waiting to move, and there's going to be a bunch of people needing to go to the bathroom. And you're going to watch that personal hygiene degrade. Every 3 hours it's going to get worse. And then you have, and maintaining one's own personal hygiene is very important to maintaining your sense of self during the disaster. So keeping some food items, keeping lights. Another thing is that when you buy a light in these days, listen, folks, do yourselves a favor. The age of batteries for lights is dead. I want to tell you that right now. And I still see some of the preparedness books. They speak about flashlights with batteries. Yeah. And I say to myself, okay, that's nice, because what they're trying to do is work like the Wall Street executives that crashed the system. So they're helping out the battery manufacturers, because they know that when the blackout comes and you can't find batteries, then whoever's selling the batteries for $1 is going to sell those batteries for 10. You're not going to find batteries during a disaster. And you're going to need a flashlight. And it's always good to look for the lights, like this one. This is a little tiny flashlight, you can see. Right? And you hold it for a second, Louise. You see how small that is?
Yes, it is.
Would you have a problem carrying something like this?
No.
Really? In your purse, right?
No.
Wouldn't be a problem, right?
No.
But if you carry this, you're always going to have light, because you can charge this up with a few cranks, right? And you can see that this is a pretty bright light.
Oh, yeah.
And this is pretty bright, not that you can flash that to your viewers, but the fact of the matter is, here you have a little tiny mega bright light that you can carry with you at all times, and you won't need batteries. That's very important. So I carry a light that doesn't need batteries. I always do. I also carry a thing called, in my personal kit, this is called a Multitool. You can see that this is like a little plier that you can use. In a lot of cases, you're going to need screwdrivers, right? You're going to need to fix something. You're going to need to open something that you might not have the ability to do with your fingers. So I was trying to pull out one of the screwdriver heads, but well, I won't do that now. But the point is that this is a multi-tool, and you can use this as a plier. You can use this particular multi-tool is interesting because it's designed to have multi-functions, to be used not only as a regular tool, but also as a wrench. And you can see that this one can be used as a wrench to open up bolts, things like that. And it also has multi-tools, all of them. Every multi-tool that you buy in the market has a knife blade. So that, you know, when you need to cut something, if you need to cut a seat belt or something like that, that you can basically do it. This is, you know, not to say what the brand is, but basically you want to have one of these. You even have them small. Would you have a problem carrying something this small?
No.
Here, put it in your hand. Take a look at it.
It's light.
Right? It's
Yes,
light,
it is.
but look at what it has in it.
Wow. Wow.
Right?
Same thing. Okay.
A little something that you might, your keys might get stuck in your car ignition, might get stuck in a door. This one even has a little built-in light on it, okay? So you can have a little light for emergencies, and then you have your little knife blade. This is something that everybody can carry. Nobody has an excuse where they wouldn't want to have something like this, right? This is kind of like the Swiss Army knife. You want to avoid these, unless you have specialized things that you that you work with. This is something that you really want to avoid. Also, when you have a personal kit, you need to carry with you a notepad. Preferably a notepad that you can write on in the rain. You can buy those at stores like EMS and things, because you're going to need to take notes. because people are going to be passing out information about what's happened, where to get food, what you need to do. And in a lot of cases, you're not going to remember it. You need to carry a notepad, and you also need to carry a good Sharpie marker, because Sharpies can write on anything. You don't want a pen, because if you have to write with a pen, then you don't know if the surface that you're writing on, you're going to be able to do it. You might have to write on something metal, and a Sharpie can pretty much write on anything. You should also have emergency money.
Okay.
But because the ATM isn't going to be working, probably. You're not going to want to go to the ATM in a disaster, right? The money that you carry, make sure you get singles, folks. Not $20 bills, not $50 bills.
Interesting. Why singles?
Because if you have a protracted period where there might be a food shortage and there might be medicine shortage, somebody offers you, let's say you want to buy a loaf of bread. So, but all you have is 50s. And they're selling you the loaf of bread for $10. So you might need 10 singles.
Gotcha.
You might need 5 singles for something. Get it in singles, folks. Get it in singles. Because even though the singles constitute more size, but you'll be able to kind of like deal with things, so you'll be able to purchase things better. All right? Another thing that you're going to want to get within your, well, let me show you this. This is a first aid kit. One of the most important things that you're going to have in your home. Everyone's got to have first aid. And I would suggest that all of your viewers get some first aid training.
Okay.
Go to the Red Cross, go to any facility that trains you in just basic first aid stuff. Because you know what? Disaster strikes, it's going to be a hard time to fit yourself into an emergency room. And if you can do things, minor things, like let's say what happens in disasters, you get lacerations, a minor laceration, that's a cut. You get a minor abrasions, a bruise, right? You get minor wounds, things that you can fix yourself, and you know that you can fix them. Having the ability to do that over standing in a line in an emergency room is going to save you so much time, so much energy, and it's going to make you safer in the long run. So a few first aid skills, well-stocked first aid, plenty of pain medication, Louise. Why? Because you know what? It's going to be a lot of headaches. You know what I mean?
Okay.
A lot of headaches. The more pain medication, the more like for the GI tract, you know, Pepto-Bismol, all the things that you need to settle your stomach, antibiotic cream, ointments, stuff to flush your eyes. Because during the World Trade Center event, we had a lot of people who had not only respiratory crisis, but you know, the ash and the dust. In a major catastrophe, like a major earthquake or so, there's going to be a tremendous amount of fire. And people are going to need eye protection. They're also going to need respiratory protection.
Okay.
And you've seen these before. Everyone who's gone to a hospital has seen these.
Yes.
These are basically partial face respirators. These are the most simple type. You have to purchase a partial face respirator and keep this in your kit. But you have to make sure to not go to the 99-cent store to do it, as a lot of us do.
Understood.
Because the 99-cent store version is basically cheesecloth. What you want is a partial face respirator and a classification of an N, P, and an R. These are all N. N basically means not resistant to organic vapors and mists. That means it doesn't have any resistance to that. So it doesn't provide protection from mists and organic vapors. But it does provide protections against particulate. And in fires, what are you encountering?
A lot
Particulate.
of, yes.
Particulate,
Okay.
right? So you've got to have one of these in your kit.
And you know, it's funny, I know during one of the last crisis, and it was a blackout, people were finding that some of their cell phones weren't working, depending on the brand and whatever. So some of the things that we've become very accustomed to, cell phones and everything else, may or may not be working in natural disasters.
Right. This kind of radio actually has a jack where you can charge your cell phone with it.
Very interesting.
But keep in mind, your cell phones, the network might be down. In a lot of cases, what the federal authorities are going to do is shut down the commercial traffic on the cell phones and only allow through text messaging. So you might be able to text message through stuff, but you might not be able to call, depending on the size of the catastrophe. The size and the scope of the catastrophe is going to, determine what is going to be available to you when you need it. So, I mean, these are some of the items. Even this thing, look, this is a little. Look at this thing, right? Little keychain device, right?
Okay.
But what does it look like to you? It just looks like a little...
looks like, okay, I'm thinking about hand grenade, but that's not
no,
okay, but it's just something,
no,
like a
that's
whistle. It
different.
looks like a whistle.
It looks like a whistle. This, folks, is a little... This is the only civilian radiation detector.
Wow.
It's called a nuke alert. Now, in the event of a nuclear emergency, and again, we're going to have one, you know, maybe it won't happen here, but it's going to happen someplace. But we do live next to Indian Point, like I said, 22 miles away. In the event of a nuclear emergency, this little device can detect background radiation levels. Okay. Now, if we ever had one in New York City, one of the most complicated things about a nuclear emergency is where's the fallout going? Okay. Because wherever the fallout goes, you can't be around there to be in contact with it. And the only way you're going to really know what the fallout levels are is if you have some way to detect the radiation. Because you can't trust what they're telling you on the radio, because they don't have people everywhere measuring radiation levels everywhere. They only have their people in the places that they need to have their people. A device like this can make the difference between life and death. Okay. Simply because if you're in a zone where you don't have to evacuate because there's no radiation, this will tell you there's no radiation. And if there is a high level of radiation, you get around it, it'll chirp. The more chirps, the more radiation. Okay. There's background radiation in this room. You can hear it ticking. That's the background radiation in the room. But if it started chirping, we'd have to turn off the camera and go.
Okay, you got it. Okay. And you know, I'm sure people are saying, where do we get these items and where do we get the training? Because, you know, we all want to know ways that we can support ourselves and our families. Tell us about how people can connect with you to find out more about the type of training that you offer to people who are interested in these survival strategies.
Well, we're doing something now called the Global Meltdown Survival Clinic, which kind of like is what we call, humorously, America's first one-stop information and training service for all things end times, considering what's been going on with the economy and everything else. So basically, people can come to our clinics, and we have professionals that can train them in every single area, professionals in the area of first aid, professionals in the area of outdoor survival, professionals in the area of even economics. But for anybody who wants to know, they can reach out to us at our website, readyforanything.org. That's readyforanything, one word.org. And all of the information is up on the website. You can post it.
Wonderful. Well, and you know, Aton, on behalf of Cultural Caravan, we salute the work you and your organization is doing, because it's so important that particularly we as a community understand that survival is so important. We understand to be proactive and understand that we have to learn survival strategies to support ourselves, our family, and those around us. So we thank you for sharing this valuable information, and we look forward to other opportunities to talk to you about ways that we can maintain ourselves.
Well, thank you for having me, Louise.
Thank you.
I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Yes, we hope you've enjoyed our program, and we encourage you to tune in next time. But until then, Louise Dente saying thank you.